Josie and I live in Los Angeles, a city so democratically blue that the sidewalks are painted with rainbow gay pride flags, even outside the confinements of June. A city where seeing bumper stickers and supportive movements like March for Our Lives and Black Lives Matter is common. A city where it is acceptable for a sign at my school to read, "Smash the patriarchy, not your food into the carpet."
For me, the moment I recognized the echo chamber that I existed in was the school day after the 2016 election. A day like no other, teachers held somber discussions instead of our usual lessons. Malevolent insults toward the newly elected president were tossed around, and I even watched as some of my fellow classmates broke down in tears. Yet, how could we, as mere 12 and 13-year-olds, have felt so much hatred towards a single person, a person we had never even met? The truth is, I, along with many of my classmates, had been taught to see MAGA hats as symbols as hate. The newly elected president himself is the enemy, and his supporters is uneducated and bigoted. The people we talked to, the things we learned in school, and even the news we read merely reinforced our beliefs. When COVID-19 hit, Emma and I watched as politicians, adults, and our own peers wrestled more deeply with their beliefs. We watched as people took to the streets to protest for their rights. We watched COVID deaths skyrocketed, and we watched history in the making with an unprecedented presidential election. Amid this chaotic year, we saw as people began to villainize those with different beliefs, to the point where civil discourse seemed impossible. It was then in April 2020 when we decided to create Teens Find Middle Ground, a nonprofit organization dedicated to cultivating empathy and understanding regardless of race, class, or party through political discourse with teens from across the aisle. Through this organization, we moderate bi-weekly discussions with teenagers from across the country and world with the hope of finding common ground. Our discussion soon became a place for unlikely friendships and lasting bonds like this one.
During discussions about gun control, reproductive rights, the election, and more, we saw two participants who kept coming back. One was a conservative from Texas, and the other was a liberal from Massachusetts, and they were both 17 years old. They disagreed often during discussions. Sometimes they'd get so invested they'd bring fact sheets to prove their points. Though over time, they began having small talk with one another. Regardless of what happened during the discussions, the participants would come early and talk about sports as if they were friends from school. We saw as the discussions tangibly broadened their perspectives, as phrases like, "I actually agree with you on that," or "I see where you're coming from," became more common in their vocabulary, though they remained in their respective political parties. Above all, the conversations put a face to the other side. They allowed participants to view the other side as humans, rather than usernames in a discourse group chat, all-encompassing labels like the Democrats and the Republicans, or nameless Twitter handles. Furthermore, the discussions allowed us to see the diversity of thought that exists within individual political parties.
For example, during a reproductive rights discussion, there was one participant who was pro-life but also a Bernie Sanders supporter. To her, being pro-life meant also being anti-ICE, against the death penalty, pro-gun reform, and anti-abortion, which rejects the traditional stance of the pro-choice left. Another example was a staunch conservative who was pro-Second Amendment and owned multiple guns, but who was also in favor of universal background checks and a mandatory waiting period before purchasing firearms. Their belief challenges the typical stance of conservatives advocating for their uninfringed Second Amendment rights. Participants like these helped us understand that people cannot be expected to agree with every policy of a party or as a part of a homogenous ideology. However, most importantly, our discussions taught us that it is not controversial politicians and partisan media propagating this divide, but our varying life experiences, influences by difference in geography, socioeconomic pressures, race, religion, everyday interactions, etc. These are what prevent someone from urban Los Angeles like us from understanding the belief system from someone from rural Wyoming. The aim of these discussions is not to change anyone's opinions, but to help teenagers become effectively motivated to weigh competing arguments on its merits rather than pre-existing stereotypes.
Luckily for us, political scientists have been studying the benefits of political discourse for many years and have constructed a type of democracy that takes into account political polarization. The solution is called deliberative democracy, a form of democracy in which discussion and deliberation occur before any political decisions are made. As Amy Gutman states in her novel, Why Deliberative Democracy, most fundamentally, deliberative democracy affirms the need to justify decisions made by citizens and their representatives. Both are expected to justify the laws they would impose on one another. To better understand the importance of deliberative democracy, we must first understand the psychological phenomenon of confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, and recall information in a manner that is consistent with what one already believes. Let's look more closely at this using the most pressing issue our country faces, abortion rights. Let's say Jane is ardently pro-choice, and she decides to browse through the news. Not only is she going to search for articles that affirm her beliefs, but she's going to interpret any article, even ones that disagree with her, in a manner that is consistent with her beliefs. John, on the other hand, someone who's ardently pro-life, could read the same exact article and reach a completely different conclusion based on his bias. Confirmation bias also helps form and reaffirm stereotypes. As Catherine A. Sanderson points out, we are more likely to remember and recall information that is stereotype consistent and to forget and ignore information that's stereotype inconsistent.
Given the pervasiveness of social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Snapchat, and the list goes on, there are countless opportunities to be exposed to information. We're too susceptible to the aesthetics of a pastel infographic or clicking on an inviting article headline. Yet how often do we take a step back and wonder the way in which the information we are consuming, information that we're not even sure is true, is shaping our belief system? Here comes the intrinsic value of deliberative democracy. The process of deliberating and explaining exact policies and one's opinions on it inherently makes people move towards the center, or at least helps them become more inclined to understand the other side more thoroughly. We saw this in our own experiences as the two participants had conversations. In addition to researching to formulate their own opinions, the more they were able to take a step back and reevaluate their previously indestructible beliefs. The nuance that comes from hearing an individual's perspective in deliberative democracy is far different from the partisan and one-sided nature of echo chambers, which solely reinforce and cherry picks someone's existing opinion in a counterproductive nature. But if you don't take our word for it, maybe you'll trust the Center of Deliberative Democracy at Stanford University. In their own words, the department is dedicated to research about democracy and public opinion obtained through deliberative polling. In 2019, the Center of Deliberative Democracy invited 526 voters to resort outside of Dallas to discuss America's most pressing issues. Over 4 days, this ideologically, racially, and geographically diverse group of people debated foreign policy, healthcare, the economy, immigration, and the environment. Political scientists James Fishkin and Larry Diamond argue that if you put a diverse group of people in a room, they are likely to mute their harshest views and wrestle more deeply with rebuttals.
The benefits of the conference were immense. The event allowed pollsters to understand what individuals believed, rather than hearing the repetition of sound bites heard on the news or exact party platforms. NORC at the University of Chicago conducted a survey with the participants both before and after the conference. The benefits and the results were clear. The more discussion and deliberation that occurred, the closer to the center the voters edged. For example, Democratic support lessened for things like a $15 minimum wage and Medicare for all, and Republican support grew for things like rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement and protecting from deportation illegal immigrants brought to the United States as children. The fact that a 4-day conference had the ability to create so much understanding and conversation across party lines shows just how vital deliberative democracy is to the future of our nation.
However, this is not to say that deliberative democracy is bulletproof. Like everything, there are boundaries to a balanced, productive discussion. Privileges like access to technology, education, and even literacy makes it hard for deliberation to be consistently equal.
Thus, Josie and I aren't claiming to have the golden key to end political polarization, nor are we advocating for a nation composed of centrists who lack conviction and passion when discussing issues. But we are hoping that by sharing the power of conversation, we can inspire you to go into the world, guards down, eyes and ears open, willing to learn and understand before making judgments.